behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's Brave New World Season 2. A magazine partner for the series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. Those of you who missed our earlier episode today, Land Where I Flee, Prajwal Parajuli in conversation with Elaine Canning, you can find this on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF, or on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest. Our next session for the day is Landscapes of Memory. Tishani Doshi and Carlo Pizzati in conversation. Location and landscape inform the work of Tishani Doshi and Carlo Pizzati. In this evocative session, they talk about how the landscapes they share, the little Dolomites of northern Italy and the coast of Tamil Nadu, both ground and displace them, how exile, nostos, hiraeth, and homecoming form bridges in their life and fiction. Tashani Doshi is an award-winning poet, novelist, and dancer. Her most recent books are Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, shortlisted for the Ted Hughes Poetry Award, and a novel, Small Days and Nights, shortlisted for the RSL Ondanchi Prize. Carlo Pizzati is the author of 8 books of fiction and nonfiction. His most recent ones are La Tigre, El Drone, Bending Over Backwards, and Mapilai. Carlos, forgive me for that pronunciation. He's a political analyst and editorialist for the newspapers La Repubblica and La Stampa. All our sessions that have been broadcast till now are available on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Please do remember to ask questions and comments by typing it into the comment section below, and we will ask both Carlos and Tishani these questions at the end of the session. And in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our Facebook and YouTube channels. Ladies and gentlemen, Landscapes of Memory, Tishani Doshi and Carlo Pizzati in conversation. Carlo, Tishani, over to you in wherever you are in Italy, sipping your wonderful wine.
Hello, everyone. This is Tishani speaking, and
hi, this is Carlo Pizzati.
So we are at the moment in Umbria in central Italy, and we've been here for about 6 weeks. We thought we'd show you a little video of the place since we are talking about landscapes. We're in a remarkable moment of the year when the leaves are turning a little bit, but it's still very green and lush here. And this is a little walk that we do from our house where we're staying down to the castle, which is a writer's retreat. And Carlo can tell you a little bit more about that.
Yes, this is the castle of hello everyone, and we're walking here in this video to the castle of Civitella Ranieri, which is in Umbertide in Umbria, a region of central Italy, which doesn't touch the sea. And it's a castle, an American foundation that hosts writers, painters, musicians who usually come here and share their experiences in an interdisciplinary residency here. But now this summer, because of the extraordinary times we're living, they're just us, these 2 writers walking towards the castle to have a conversation with you in this beautiful region, which is nearby Assisi, where Saint Francis, the Catholic saint, used to live. And so here we are walking to the castle.
Yeah, so just to note that we don't actually live in the castle. We live in the little house outside the castle, but it's nevertheless a very, very beautiful and inspiring place to work. And many, many great writers and artists have stayed here. And so it's a great privilege to be at Civitella Ranieri and to be able to use its library, its grounds, its rooms.
And we thought it was also the perfect idea to explain how landscape can inspire, as this landscape, this ancient castle, has inspired many and is inspiring us.
Yes, and I think you're not supposed to have favorites in a place, but for me, Umbria is one of my favorite regions. It's a place that I've come back to again and again, and I feel very well here, very protected. And we'll talk about this later, but normally I'm a coast sea person, so it's strange that I've fallen in love with this place without a sea. But we're going to talk today about the landscapes we share.
Yes.
And here we are at the castle. So now we'll beam into your live.
Hello.
Hi. Okay, so I think we're on. Yes.
Yeah.
And essentially, we wanted to talk a little bit about how landscape and memory intersect for us in our life and our work. Interestingly, so I grew up in the city of Madras, now Chennai in Tamil Nadu, and Carlo grew up in northern Italy in a place called Valdagno in the Veneto region. Um, and we're married and we've been together for some time. And so we've shared our personal spaces and we've traveled a lot. But I think that it's interesting. One of our early connections was the American South, because Carlo as a 16-year-old and me as a 17-and-a-half-year-old left our hometowns to travel to America, and we landed up in the American South. And somehow something about that landscape has also affected our lives and our work.
We were talking about, as we were thinking about what we would discuss with you today, is the landscape that we have in common in the South. But I think that is also for me when I was 16 in 82, and I went down to Pensacola, Florida, where I discovered nostalgia for the valley I came from, in the valley of the Agno in Valdagno, and the mountains themselves, because I was in a very flat landscape, of course, there near the Gulf of Mexico. And to me, I missed the mountains so much. I was a rock climber at the time, that I would climb on one floor homes and just to feel the rock on my hands. And I was sort of missing it so much that I was painting the mountains. So I was remembering the landscape of my home, of my Heimat, right, of my homeland, in a way, this valley, and I was missing it so much that I would be painting these in watercolors, these mountains. Mountains that represented for me the love of the ancestors who had been there as climbers, skiers, fighters in the resistance as well, but also death, because a lot of people have died in those mountains, also climbers and people that I know. And so in a way, for me, it's been a landscape of spirituality, even without having religion in it, because the mountains bring you so close to the sky. I've always felt that I was always in some sort of investigation about what's invisible up there. So that's the way in which this landscape has sort of informed me down there, because I felt that I was somewhat close to the sky. This is why I'm so attached to skiing, to climbing, and also have somewhat of a spiritual relationship with the mountains, because it inspires some larger thoughts that go beyond logic. And when I met Tishani, I noticed how much she was really a sea person, because she grew up by the sea. So we had a bit of not an adjustment, because then I moved there, but we had a discussion about the mountain and the sea.
Yeah,
right?
I think, and it's an ongoing discussion. I mean, Carlo has dragged me up his mountains many times, and I have grown to love them too, not maybe with the same spiritual connection, because I still feel my sea level heart panting every time I try to climb up the mountains. But I do feel that sense of wonder, the sense of the individual and the landscape they are in. The sea has a very different effect for me. It has something very eternal, but it's also because we're here close to the ground, in a sense of moving, of going elsewhere, of restlessness, which I think is very much a part of my nature. But the mountains are this sort of a reminder of your smallness, and also it grounds you somehow, because they're there, whereas the sea feels very, very moody, and at least the Bay of Bengal, which is the sea that I know. But it's so interesting that you brought up ancestors. It's something that I've been thinking about so much, because I think for me, all of my work is really looking at the lens of sort of kind of the outsider in a way, and this finding place. What does it mean to find your place? What does it mean to belong? And always struggling and this tussle. And I think partly it's because I was looking at my family histories. And so I'm a very new person to Madras, in the sense that I don't have generations of families there. My paternal great grandparents moved from Anjar in Kutch in Gujarat in about 1920 to Madras and made their life there. And, so my grandfather, my father, and then my mother is from Wales, North Wales. And so these are very different landscape, Kutch and North Wales. And then you think these are people who've come from there. And then of all places is Chennai. So, how do you then create your relationship with the place? And yet for me, if I had to name the place that I return to again and again, that place is definitely the city of Madras.
It's interesting how we intertwine both our gaze into the landscape of our memory and also of our history, meaning the ancestors, because I instead come from Valdagno, where my family moved from a little higher up in the mountains, about 800, 1,000 meters above sea level, where they had been living for generations. But in the early 1800s, they moved down to this valley because it was developing commercially, so they were opening shop there, and they built the house where I've grown up in 1834. And so for me, when I wrote my first novel 15 years ago, I wanted to really investigate this. Also because I discovered that Valdagno, in the galleries that take you in the Vatican to the Sistine Chapel, there are some beautiful galleries with frescoes that have been painted by a Dominican friar, Ignazio Danti, under commission of Gregory XIII, the Pope, in 1580. And I went to look for the name of my town because there were maps of the Veneto and different regions of Italy. And instead of finding Valdagno, I found the word criminal, and which gives the title of the novel, and made me want to investigate why this town was called Criminal 500 years before I discovered this, which no one had investigated. And so I got into a very obsessive relationship with the landscape of my youth by investigating its geography, its geology, even because it used to be a lake in hundreds of thousands of years ago. And then I went into almost a botanical journey to discover the story of the plants of this landscape, all the way to the myths, because there are witches who used to live there, actually a pre-Catholic religion that lived there. So went very much in depth into the investigation of the family memory and everyone's collective memory of the town through the centuries. And for me, that was important, even in discovering the founder was a German warlord who founded the town. So I went quite in depth in order to understand why I had a relationship, why I had such an attachment, and how I thought that maybe it represented who I was and who I had become, because I'd been traveling all the time. So for me, this Heimat, this idea of this German word that captures it better than any other language, the idea of homeland somehow, of belonging, which it was born from the fact that I grew with such nostalgia after I left it. So this pain, this suffering that comes from the feeling of the need for homecoming, which is what nostalgia means, right? So the nostalgia fed this investigation into the landscape, the discovering of the history of the landscape, kind of gave me a closure, and I finally was able to deal with my Heimat with less emotions, with equal attachment. So for me, it was some sort of a formative experience. Whereas in Tishani's case, I noticed that even the recent history has informed her literature and her poetry. In fact, I was very impressed when we first met by one poem told a story of a very recent, somewhat recent compared to Valdagno's history, event which tarnished India, the tsunami of 2004, and this beautiful poem that you wrote about it, which to me brought me the smells and I understood the feeling you had with your land through that poem. Would you like to tell it?
Yeah,
you know which one I'm talking about?
It's a short poem, and it's one of the earliest poems I wrote. It's called "The Day We Went to the Sea." The day we went to the sea, mothers in Madras were mining the marina for missing children. Prisoners ran free. Houses danced like danger in the wind. I saw a woman hold the tattered edge of the world in her hand, look past the temple, which was still standing as she was, miraculously whole in the debris of gaudy South Indian sun. When she moved her other hand across her brow in a single arcing sweep of grace, it was as if she alone could alter things, bring us to the wordless safety of our beds. So this poem I wrote very soon after the tsunami, and I remember the neighbors calling and saying that, fishermen are saying that the sea is coming to the land. And, we all sort of went, the neighbors in the kaftans in the early morning, and we had been rattled out of bed literally because there was a mini earthquake. And so some of us felt the shaking. And in a way, the poem really represents so much, not just the fact of this natural disaster coming upon us and wreaking this havoc, which the tsunami certainly did to our coast, but also this idea, I suppose, which for me has become a larger exploration of the singularity and the belief in the body and the idea of the individual body. So this image of this one woman who's moving her hand in this sweep of grace, who can bring us somehow back to what we were before. That idea that there can be some kind of restoration or reclamation in life, and I believe in literature as well. And so for me, it's like this image of that woman in the ruin, in the destruction, and somehow waving a magic wand, as it were, and bring us back. And for me, that sea is such a feisty sea. We have gone through not just the tsunami, but floods, cyclones. We've gone through so much tempestuous relationship with it, and now we live on a beach. We live right in front of that sea, and it reminds us every day of the fact of everything can change at any time, and you never can get too comfortable, and the salt air comes in and corrodes everything, and the hinges rust and things are falling off, and it's a constant reminder of decay, and I think that it's a very heightened way to live. And it's been, I think that it's affected both our work, because I definitely have written about it in all of my books, the sea, but you've written it in recent books too.
Now it has become our landscape, our common landscape. I am an adopted son of Tamil Nadu now, I suppose, and so I know how to pronounce Mapile, Sanjay.
Which is Tamil for son-in-law. Tamil for son-in-law.
For you Northern Indians out there.
I was wondering whether it was Italian, whether it was Tamil, what on earth it was. So thanks.
So this is my memoir about being an Italian son-in-law in India and adopting this landscape, which now, through Tishani's introduction, and even though I met Tamil Nadu before, but it has become a landscape of our narrative now. Of course, it's in your novel as well.
I mean, in a lot of the poems in Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, but also especially in Small Days and Nights, there's this sense of, and it's also interesting to think about it, thinking about landscape in a time of COVID, which is not something that we had talked about earlier, but the sense of isolation and where you are, where you happen to be when this thing is going on. And if you happen to be out in a very remote place, that sense of exaggeration, of loneliness, of being disconnected, and how landscape can either enhance that or change that in some way.
Yes, and it's interesting what you're saying about the COVID, is because travelers, as both you and I are, all of a sudden have to stick with one specific landscape outside their window, those who have a window in lockdown. Then the question of how important is your memory of the landscape grows, and your need for a changing landscape, as ours was. I resorted to video games and started playing Red Dead Redemption on a video game because it had a lot of beautiful landscapes. Aside from finding the landscape in literature, there are other languages, of course, TV and series and video games as well, because just not be too proprietary with literature as being the only provider of landscape, but definitely it brought me to think about also not just the landscape of our heimat, of our nostos, but all the different landscapes we have accumulated since we were young teenagers and adolescents in America, the different countries that I have lived in afterwards. And I asked myself how much those landscapes have changed me, and how they have become a little bit of a homeland, like the Mapile land of Tamil Nadu has become a home. So was Mexico for a while, because I've lived there, and America for a while. So, and I've documented that in books. And so I think you can also appropriate a landscape which is not inherently yours, and you can make it yours through the description, of course, in your books. And then it stays with you, because once you build that cathedral of words that describes it, you become it, and it becomes you, of course, in a way, right? I think that.
But I think, this sense of also, I think there's a sense of restlessness that we've both had as people and travelers and wanderers, and had that luck that we've been able to go with work and our lives to many places. But there's also, at least for me, I've always envied in a way the very rooted connection that some people have to their land, because I think I miss it in a way. And so for me, I think Suketu Mehta had in Maxim City this beautiful idea of the adulterous citizen, that when you are in one place, you're dreaming of the other. You're walking down the streets of Bombay and you're thinking about New York or whatever. It could be Madras and Umbria, and there's this sense of elsewhere. And I wrote a book of poems called Everything Begins Elsewhere. And I really feel that there's something very seductive about the notion of elsewhere. I think a lot of us, especially, if you didn't grow up in a big city, if you're not like, in the big metropolis where everything seems to be happening, if you're out on the edge, on the margins, what does it mean to feel that disenfranchisement? Or also, what does it mean to feel that life is passing you by and you need to somehow catch it? And I think in that way, technology has changed the landscape a lot, because it's allowing us to do something like this, where we have all become armchair travelers these days and have to stay put. But it's also forcing us to reckon with the landscapes that we find ourselves in, which is a very which is a potent concept also,
And the question we asked ourselves when we were thinking about this was in relationship to exactly these two types of landscape. The landscape you grew up with, which is beautifully described in that we found a poem, just 2 lines of another poem or another poet, if we may.
Yes, we must. We absolutely must.
Steal her life for a moment by quoting a poem called Nostos by someone who just won the Nobel Prize in Literature.
The great Louise Glick,
who says, "We look at the world once in childhood, and the rest is memory." It kind of gave us pause for thought, this, because we also wondered, like, did we stop building the intense emotional memory when we left at 16 or at 17? And is it true that Madras and Valdagno are the only true deep landscapes? And it's true for everyone, all of you perhaps, like where you grew up is who you become, and that's where your home is. And I don't know, I think I'd like to challenge that in the sense that you can have second childhoods. It will not be as intense probably, but the landscape of your memory can be reborn, because it depends exactly on that emotional connection that you make with the place. And if you are alone, you're alien, you're a stranger, you have to be naked in front of the landscape, in front of the environment, and let it affect you. And so it will become yours. Maybe we'll never get as close, and Louise Glick is right. But I think that there is chances for travelers and people with nomadic nature that are able to live in different cultures or different states with strong diversity to build a new relationship with the new landscape.
But I think it's such a fascinating idea because, well, childhood, as we know, for writers is such a rich area, a rich territory of emotion, of memory, of like Flannery O'Connor said that if you survive childhood, that's it, you have enough material for the rest of your life to be a writer. And I think that that's true, that sense of, maybe because that sense of wonder, that sense of time is very different when you're a child. It's not the same as when you're an adult. But also the sense of memory being unreliable. And I think I would like to think of landscape as also being somewhat shifting and unreliable. So our way that we use memory to think about place, especially when we're far. I remember being a student, leaving India for the first time, phone calls were very expensive, writing letters home, really deep, homesickness, dreaming about food, just wanting something familiar, hearing a snippet of language, either Hindi or Tamil or something that I thought, oh, that's something I know. And that's very powerful. But then it also shifts your idea of place. And then when you go back, when you have left that place and you return, everybody who has left knows this feeling of re-entering and feeling somewhat like an intruder,
Yes, absolutely. I was thinking, as you were speaking, I was thinking that landscape in a way is the mirror of your transformation. It was, for me at least, this famous mountain I go and I climb every time I go back to Valdagno and to Requaro, which is right below these little Dolomite mountains. There's a mountain called Corneto, the little horn, is shaped like a horn. And when I was in 18, 19, I had incredible moments of poetry and of vision and of dreams. I would dream the night after visiting the peak of that mountain. And I guess that's when I was really building the relationship with this place. And I go back there now, of course, I'm much older. I have the memory of those emotions, but I might not live them in the same freshness. So I just thought how much it has been a mirror of the passage of time for me personally. That I realize I try to feel inside what I was feeling then. And of course, I feel things differently, maybe less or in a different manner. And so the landscape is there also to remind you of your own passage of time. Like it seems still, but while it is transforming because it is collapsing also because of global warming, because of earthquakes that happen here in Italy, as well as some parts of northern India, cyclones. Our landscape is ravaged, destroyed very often, and yet some points are still there. And if you have the fortune of having something to hang on to, like the mountain that I'm referring to, then it will show you, it will tell you the story. You think you are telling the story of the landscape. The landscape is telling you your own story.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also increasingly as a writer, sort of having moved from a sense of autobiography from one's own life, from one's own body, and how one moves through the world with that body, there's also interesting with the passage of time, with movement, and in broadening out. And I think it's, at least I feel that for me, it's in that phase of considering the idea of a collective memory as opposed to just individual memory. And what does it mean to be alive in this moment? What does it mean to bear witness? What does it mean to live in these extraordinary times? Of course, every time is extraordinary, but I really think we can say that it's pretty batty at the moment. So that sense of holding everything, the great beauty, the great wonder, but also all the difficulty, all the violence and everything that we contend with. And then I think with writing, there is a way of creating another landscape, which can also be visionary, which is also to say, like, what kind of place do we want to live in? And can we create that? Or can we even think about what that place might be from where we are standing now? And I think so that's a very interesting moment as a writer, as an artist, to sort of consider the work as a way of reclaiming something or creating something.
I love the idea of collective memory of the landscape, because it reminds me, again, back to the little Dolomite mountains, that we, in my province, not just Valdagno, the other valleys that face these mountains, we also have a very strong collective memory towards the specific mountain, which is right across from Corneto, the Pasubio mountain. I just thought about the Coromandel coast and how that is the landscape of the collective memory of the tsunami, natural disaster, a tragedy brought about by the elements. And we have the Pasubio, which is a landmark of a landscape, a mountain that reminds us of a human-made disaster, which is World War I, where between 1915, when Italy entered into the war, until 1918, kids, 16, 17, 18, Italian, Austrian, from all over Italy, from all over the Austrian Empire, killed each other with bombs, with bayonets in trenches. And so when we go and walk with my friends, and Tishani has come, walk through 52 galleries, through this mountain where all these soldiers fought, it becomes the landscape of a collective memory. And it gives us pause for thought again about not something personal, but something collective like war, that we're hoping that we're going to avoid by keeping Europe united and by keeping the world united somehow. So this remembering the deaths that we had in a lot of people had in their family, their grandparents, great-grandparents. The landscape, this becomes some kind of a temple of our memory, this mountain for us, because it reminds us to keep away from war.
Yeah, I was thinking about a question that somebody asked me in Bali. I'd recorded a video in this beautiful paddy fields reading a poem, and it was a poem about violence against women. And I was reading that poem, and then somebody said, but you chose this very beautiful place to read this poem, and isn't it too incongruous? And I said, look, I see these beautiful green paddy fields, and I see that how it stretches out on the horizon. But I can also see the body that's lying in the ditch of this field, And so for me, it's really a question of knowing that just what we see superficially in the landscape is one thing. And underneath, there are layers and layers of time and geology and bodies and lives and histories and mythologies. And part of being in a landscape, of walking through it, is also to kind of have the imagination or the ability to harness, that memory, which you may not even know, but you can hint at. there's a fly and I'm not Mike Pence, so get out of here.
It's an Italian fly. It's not a Democrat fly. I don't know if you can hear it, but I also would like to tell you that in 10 minutes, we're taking less than 10 minutes. I think it will be in 5 or 6 minutes, we'll be taking audience questions. But, one thing that you did not talk about is that you have a little Valdagno in a certain way through your mother in Wales. And which connects a little bit in Wales, which I visited as well. It's a big, and it reminded me of Valdagno because it is not a major city in Europe. It's a small place, and yet it is for you adopted landscape of the
hiraeth. Yeah, well, there's a beautiful Welsh word called hiraeth, and it is kind of like a longing for a place, but it's not just longing for a place that you know that you're going to return to, but it's also a kind of longing for a place that maybe doesn't even exist. So it's kind of a real deep yearning. There's a Portuguese word also. No?
Saudade.
Yeah, I think that it has they echo each other in some ways. And for me, Wales is a place that I've gone to over in my life a few times, but I don't have that sense of belonging that I do with my patch of coastline in Tamil Nadu. But it's a place of elsewhere. It's a place of possibility. It's a place where my mother came from, where her people came from. And I think that it's very interesting how those places can be really magical portals to sort of enter into. And I've written a book called Fountainville, which is a retelling of a myth from the Mabinogion, which is a medieval Welsh, and I just think that those places are also very worth sort of exploring in what they bring out of the writer, so it's not just the place that you have your sense of ownership or belonging, but also the places where you long to make that connection. And sometimes you don't even need a relationship. You don't need a family member to connect you to it. It could be something completely different.
And it's time for questions. I have one for you to think about, because we talked about mountain and sea, just for you to think about. Like, do you think that the landscape that informs you, whether you're from the mountain, from the city, transforms you as a being? Like, if you're born by the sea, do you feel a penchant towards infinity? If you're born near the mountains, do you feel a penchant towards conquest? Or it's good to interrogate yourself maybe on how it affected you. But we have a question, right?
Yes. So girls are coming out of the woods. How different is the process of performance from the process of writing? Well, I think that for me, the writing comes first. It's always the first. The trigger is to go to language, and that's my vocabulary is words. But dance and movement is my second vocabulary. It's something that I've learned later, and I go using the text as a kind of, I suppose, a kind of platform from which to spring. And I like the idea of inhabiting both those worlds, both those landscapes, if you will, in different ways, because obviously the performance is something much more, writing is vulnerable too, but I think when you're in a live audience, there's something completely stripped away, and you offer yourself in a way, with the audience. It's a special chemistry, and it's magic. And literary festivals do that too, which we all miss. Okay.
Shruti? The second one?
Yes.
I'll read you that.
Okay.
In your book, Small Days, and Shruti asks, in your book, Small Days and Nights, Grace returns home after spending years away from home, only to realize that the idea of home was never a place, rather a feeling she had not made peace with. Her journey unfolds back from where it started. What is your idea of home? Do you feel it's more of a feeling than a place?
Yeah, I think that there's a geographical place of home, which is a valid one, but it's also the home that you carry with you. I remember interviewing Anita Desai a long time ago, one of my first author interviews, and I absolutely loved speaking to her because she talked about the idea of carrying your home with you wherever you go, like being a turtle. And I think increasingly having worked as a dancer for so long, that sense of the body being the place that you return to, the body being the microcosm of the universe, the body holding everything that you need. If you have that and you move through the world, then you carry your home with you. And I think also homeland is in language. I mean, I've been in Italy for 5 months now. My Italian is not getting any better, and I feel excluded from from life because of my difficulty with language. And so in a way, I would say English is also a homeland, because for me, the minute I can speak in the language that I speak fluently, it is like opening up, you know. But yeah, it's also people, it's so many things.
Sarah Sharma asked, do both your writing processes differ? If so, how? How do you plan and research on a new text?
And then there's something for you, Carlo, which
Yeah,
is...
but maybe let's answer that. Right.
Okay.
Writing process differ. I don't write poems anymore.
Yeah.
It depends. We both write in the morning, so that process.
I think in terms of,
It's
you've
similar.
done books with a lot of research, and also you have the journalism background.
Yeah, and I've written memoirs, so
Yes.
definitely I am more. How could you call it? Less concerned about revealing directly my life, I suppose, because in Mapile I was quite direct. Tishani still hides it in literature, in novels and poems.
I think it's a very different process. I think also the triggers. I'm very interested about where these things come from. The idea to write a poem or the idea to write a novel, the seed of these things. And I think it's quite mysterious. So I don't actually know why I write or where those things come from. It's the writing that is the process. And the fact is that it's different for every book. It's not like once you have a process, that's how it is for every book you write. So you're always trying to figure it out. It's like being in a state of helplessness all the time and uncertainty. So that's just how it is.
Plan and research on new text. For me, research, for example, for Criminal, I did a very extensive old style research in secret archives of the Vatican, and I got bitten by the bug of the historian. So I was really discovered some ancient Renaissance texts, and it was very, very exciting. Otherwise, I like to really base a lot of all of my books on the specific documents of things that have happened. So even in Nimodo, the novel I've written in Italian about an adventure in Latin America was all based on things that I had experienced directly. So I write my journals, I keep them, and they're an incredible treasure for me. But I also read books on the topics that I write about: historical, geographical, political. Shweta Srivastava asks me, for someone who, you want to read that?
For someone who has written on travel and culture extensively, how has the pandemic had an impact on your writing process?
I'm sorry to say, but the pandemic, I'm sorry to say that because it has caused so many deaths, and I'm quite aware of that. But personally, it has improved my capacity to concentrate and to produce and to write, less distractions, and I've been more productive, not than ever, but maybe because also my age, I'm at a mature stage in which I'm bringing the best out of my experience. So I feel that being forced to be even more reclusive than we already were at the beach or wherever we've been traveling has had, and also, you know, the thought of death has passed through everyone's brain and feelings much more intensely, obviously, because we're faced with a deadly disease which is hitting the entire world. It gives a gravitas and a profundity that is very helpful in writing and thinking, and I think it's a great chance to become serious again. And I welcome that. I see great signs of the seriousness returning without being morose or being sad, but simply of taking things seriously. Science first and foremost, literature as well. So it has affected very positively, honestly, because I maybe that's my attitude, but I turn it around that way. Tishani, it is rare for a poet to traverse so many communities and readerships. Do you feel you belong to any one literary community? Agastya Verma asks that.
No, I think I belong to many communities, and it's wonderful. I would say that the poetry community is my first community, and that begins in India, but it also extends to other places. And just the poets in general, you know, I feel like poets are a very particular group of writers, and there has been extreme generosity that I've experienced, and a great sense of sharing, translation, looking at each other's work, making so many gestures where actually in other places you would talk about so many things, but with poetry, it's sort of, you just come with your gift and other people come with their gift. And so this gift economy where you're making something and, there's very little money to speak of, but you're very invested with the idea of creating. So for me, the poetry community is very strong. And I have to say, I just link back to the idea of the pandemic. I think poetry has really been speaking to what we're going through now. There's an elasticity in poetry where you can actually respond with a kind of speed in a way that you just can't do with a novel. So for me, I think I've been looking a lot to not just the journalists who are doing very important work of telling us what's going on, but also the poets who are sort of giving us another view, about how we should.
And also because journalism, people get jaded a little bit and they don't listen or they're not affected. So it's important that poetry comes into play and starts addressing those questions. Vrinda Arora asks, do you think cuisine, language, weather, and people around or far from you change the way you see the world and write about them? We have 5 more minutes to the end of the session. Tishani, cuisine, Italian cuisine, definitely Italian cuisine affects, change the way you see the world. If you have a very good plate of pasta, sorry to be cliche, but it does affect the world. You get very blissful about the world if you have a very good masala dosa. And eat
well, let me just say that Italians, and I'll go on record, and I've said this before, are not that curious about other people's food.
Yes,
and
that's not the question.
There is no Saravana Bhavan within any site for me. So I am desperate, and I think that they're not so
we're arrogant about our food, and I apologize in the name of all the rest of the Italians for that.
Although the food is very good here.
But does it does it change the way you see the world, the language, the weather? Of course, I write both in Italian and English. I think for me, writing in English, it has freed a lot of humor that I was not able to express in Italian. So I'm quite happy with the possibility of expressing myself in another language, which is not necessarily my mother tongue. But we have 2 more questions. I don't know if we have time.
I'm going to answer this one, the last
Shreya
one.
Dasgupta, how difficult is it to choose a new home, geographically, culturally, linguistically? How difficult is it to jump what is apparently a gaping wide
choosing a new home? I don't know. I think sometimes
you are chosen.
You are taken somewhere. I definitely didn't choose North Carolina. I got a scholarship, so I went there. Otherwise I would have gone to North Dakota, or I had no idea where I was going, and it didn't matter because that's where I got a scholarship to go. So I think sometimes in life you don't have the luxury of making those decisions. The fact that you can go is amazing enough. But then when you're there, you kind of have to try and understand that context.
Yes, I think that the problem we have, Shreya, with the question is choosing, because also I was chosen by a host family when I went as an exchange student to Pensacola, Florida, and I fell in love with Tishani, which brought me to India. I didn't really choose to fall in love, it sort of happened. So I don't know about choosing, but how difficult is it to jump what is apparently a gaping wide gap? It's very difficult. I remember the first night of arriving in Pensacola with this family of strangers, and I cried all my tears out. And then I stopped being nostalgic from that moment on, because I knew I was so far away from home. So at that age is extremely difficult. But even I suppose later on, I moved around a lot of continents, a lot of countries. It depends on you. I always let the excitement of the novelty be more important than the feeling of missing the friends that I left behind. And so it depends on you. Kabir has a question for Tishani.
Yeah, it's the last question, and it's about Small Days and Nights, about the gulf between Grace, the protagonist, and the other women in the village. What were you thinking about as you wrote about them? And do you think landscape also plays a major role in women's life? Yes, that's a great question. I was thinking about the deep inequalities of experience that at least I've witnessed as a woman in India, and that sense of being able to move between landscapes like urban and rural, and having the ability to be able to do that, and understanding that it's a very different experience to be from one place and then going over to the other place. And I think that I try to do this in the book, which is to talk about the difficulty for Grace, so I'm not trying to explain anybody else's experience, but I'm trying to explain that experience that I am familiar with, which is, what does it mean to try and find your place, to be an outsider, to not belong anywhere, to not be really of the city, but to definitely not be part of the village either. But while you're in the village, like, can you understand the context of the people who are living there? She struggles to do that. So there's a lot of struggling to understand, but I think like we are in that position where that felt the most honest way to write about it, as a way of struggling to sort of to try and keep elbowing and jostling and to say, okay, what does it mean to hold place? What does it mean that this is your caste, this is your place, this is your gender, this is your, these are the things that are limiting us? And is it possible to create alternative families, alternative structures? So there's just hints of that in the book, but it comes from this deep rebelling, I guess, against the structures that are trying to put us in a specific box. I don't know if that answers your question, and I don't know if we've answered all your questions. I feel like we're talking very, very fast, but
because we're afraid we're out of time.
I feel like we might need to stop soon. Yeah.
Time out. Well, I hope you enjoyed the talk, and we enjoyed thinking about these topics in order to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, we did. Thank you for asking us.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thank you so much, Tishani Doshi and Carlo Pizzati. By the way, you can get me to come across there and cook for both of you, and you don't have to feel nostalgic about home. And I promise that I'll be really careful when I tiptoe around the fort. But I know for many of the people who are watching, everybody may well have a sense of that hiraeth that you talked about, that longing for that other place, especially now. But truly, that was such a beautifully structured conversation. So thank you. And thank you for showing us that awesome castle. What I didn't see was the glass of wine or the bottle of wine that you should be having to tell us a little bit more, or the Italian tomatoes and something that you would have cooked. So next time, let's get that too during the conversation.
Special package.
Absolutely. But thank you all for watching, and please do remember to log back on Wednesday, the 14th of October, to watch another set of great sessions on JLF's Brave New World. We have Dystopian Realities, Writing Rural Distress, Namita Vaikar and Neelama Kota in conversation with Namita Bhandare. Rural India continues to remain in the periphery of social and media consciousness, and agrarian protest and unrest gets little media attention, even at this moment of present crisis. In conversation with journalist Namita Bhandare, novelist Namita Vaikar, and Neelima Kota, who examines the cause and consequences of this indifference and the issues that need to be constantly center staged to address this balance. And this is at 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 2:30 p.m. British Standard Time, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And that is followed by The Silence of Sherazade, Defne Suman in conversation with Manasi Subramanyam, a Turkish novelist. Defne Suman's magical novel, Silence of Sherazade, tells the intertwining story of a Levantine, a Greek, a Turkish, and an Armenian family in the turbulent years 1905 to 1922. So do remember, this is at 8:30 p.m. IST, 4 p.m. British Standard Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And we're also delighted to be back with our very loved India by the Bay Festival. Over the past 5 years, India by the Bay has established itself as one of Hong Kong's landmark cultural festivals, fusing the classical and contemporary across art, music, theatre, dance, food, literature, film, and wellness, essential ingredients of India's multicultural identity. The 6th edition of India by the Bay is from 15th to 18th of October and features Shashi Tharoor with Mukulika Banerjee, Romy Gill, Shubhendra Rao, and so much more. So remember, check that out, India by the Bay, Hong Kong. See you all on Wednesday. Stay safe, stay masked.